Dufferin Caledon. The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Welcome to another exciting episode of In Conversation with Alethia. I am your host, Alethia O'Hara Stephenson. On each episode, I sit down with incredible individuals from our community. These individuals are doing amazing and inspiring things. The show will educate, it will empower, and it will inspire you. Today, I am extremely excited to have an amazing individual from our community. He's a community leader, he's a champion, he's an entrepreneur, he's a firefighter. I call him the hero who doesn't wear a cape. His name is Randy Narine. Randy, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. You know, I've watched your journey over the last few years and how you have just thrived into a businessman, and you know, so much so that you're giving so much back to the community, not just as a firefighter, but with your experience as an entrepreneur. And I want to go right into that and start from the beginning.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so from the beginning, who is Randy Narine?
I'm an immigrant from Trinidad. So I actually came to Canada on refugee status back in 1991. Abu Bakr had taken over Trinidad. He was a Muslim terrorist. Mm-hmm. He held the government hostage. My parents actually had happened to be in Canada on vacation when it happened, and they got trapped here. And I was back home with my grandparents, so they actually had to smuggle me out of the country. They smuggled me out on a boat, and then they flew me back up into Canada, and we had refugee status, and we stayed here. Life in Canada was not easy, especially as a newcomer to Canada. I don't think people really understand the challenges people go through and the stigmas of a person from another country coming here, just trying to make a better life.
Right.
My family we actually didn't even want to come here. It was out of those circumstances that we ended up here. And we're not knocking Canada. I absolutely love it here. And I call this my home and not Trinidad anymore, but I'm also 42 now. But Canada was very challenging, but the one thing I could say about Canada is a lot of opportunities.
Yes.
So being here, I really didn't know what to do, because to me, the opportunities were endless. And you know, I went through school. My family's always been very business oriented. My dad worked at a factory, but he also had like his little side businesses. Like he was always doing something, like buying rental properties. He was like, and again, my parents were not by any means rich. We were, if anybody else is to look at us, we were a very poor family. And even at Canadian standards, we were poor, but my parents were very thrifty. You know, we saved a lot. And my parents were able to purchase some rental properties with that. And that's where I really saw the value in that. And then my dad also started, he loved birds and fishes. So his hobby ended up later on in life turning into a business, where he found out there's this whole bird club in Canada, and he ended up becoming a bird breeder.
That's fascinating.
It's so weird how it happened. So my dad was always business minded. My dad was always looking at different opportunities. And my mom was that person that just took care of the home. And my mom worked very, very hard. And they both put up with a lot. And I watched the stuff that they endured. But at the end of the day, they always turned the other cheek, and no matter what was said to them or what was done to them, they just kept working through it.
Right.
And then eventually, as they got older, you know, my dad rose up to end up running the company, being in charge of the company he was with. He had 2 rounds of cancer, and unfortunately he passed away about 6 years ago.
Right.
And then my mom, you know, she was just a hardworking individual. My mom was very, very educated, where my dad didn't even finish high school, but my dad was one of these hustlers. He just worked.
Hard work pays off.
It was just hard work that got him to where he was. My mom was very educated, and both my parents always instilled, get an education. It doesn't matter what it is, just get an education, go to college, university, because at the end of the day, even though you don't know what you want to do or what path you want to go down, you'll have something to fall back on.
That is truth.
So I went to U of T. I have a Bachelor of Commerce, and that was hard for me because I worked 3 jobs while I was going through school to pay for university. So I can't say my grades were the greatest because I was working, I pretty much worked full time between those 3 jobs while working or finishing university. When I finished, I ended up landing a pretty good job at Scotiabank, and at Scotiabank, I worked for the head office. I did a lot of high net worth profiles, high net worth investments, things like that. But I was in this weird new division called Special Projects, which was, we really didn't have a specific job. We were just kind of like the jack of all trades that did a lot of different things. And it allowed me the opportunity to see who was really making money out there. And that's what opened my eyes. And as silly as it may sound, working at the bank, because I started off as a teller.
Wow.
You really get to know who has money and who doesn't. And I became a people watcher there. And I'm very much a people watcher. Now, fast forward, what you don't know, and a lot of people don't know, is I actually had a company many years ago.
Right.
I had my own transportation company, and that just kind of happened through circumstances. But I opened up my own company. I focused on food and pharma. I did really well with it. And the reason I picked food and pharmaceuticals was because I just wanted to recession-proof my business. So the recession had come, and I saw what was still shipping and what wasn't. And I wanted to be on that train. I wanted stability.
Wow.
So that's what I did. And then by doing that, I entered a market that was very tight niched, and I ended up taking it over. So these major companies were like, who is this guy? How is he taking our business? And I ran my business on one thing. And this is how I live my life. You treat people respect, you gain respect.
Right, absolutely.
You know, that's all it is. So, you know, just the kindness, being available to these customers, going above and beyond. And I wasn't there for a quick buck. But by providing good service, I was able to gain more clients and more business.
And building those strong relationships, I think, was key for you too.
It was huge. Because I still have those relationships.
Wow.
So even after I sold the company, and it's funny because McCain Foods bought my company. So many moons ago, they came.
Amazing.
I was having a rough time. Being a business owner, I don't think people realize how much struggles you go through.
It's no longer a 9 to 5. It's
no,
24
hours a day.
right?
And I was really away from my family. I had this young son. I had just recently got separated. I didn't know what to do. It was hard being a single parent trying to run a company. And at this point, my company was large. So I had lots of staff, lots of warehouses, lots of things going on. But unfortunately, I didn't have the time to dedicate to my kid. And I did all this for my kid.
Right, yeah.
So it's like that double-edged sword. Yes, I've got a lot of money now, but now I don't see my kid. And the more money I was making, the less time I had with him. And it started to break my heart. And then I was having a couple bad days, and McCain Foods kept coming. I still remember the day they walked in, and I just gave them a number, and they said yes. And I'm like, I should have asked for more. But
that was a lesson by itself, right? Because now you know what opportunities are out there, and what you are worth, and what potentially your hard work is worth.
Well, to tell you the truth, what I sold it for was really good. Like I did really, really well off of it. It just in my head, it was just always a joke, like, I should have asked for more money. Like, when you go to someone and you just make an offer to them, like, yeah. And you're like, did I sell it for too cheap? So then what ended up happening was they took over the company, and they were having a hard time running it because they tried to take my business and put it into their cookie cutter mold.
Wow.
The reason I was successful is because I wasn't a cookie cutter mold.
Okay.
So they came back to me after and asked for me to contract and help them. And then they started a new division, and they wanted me to help them with that. So I gave them my stipulations on it, and they agreed to it.
Nice.
Because at the end of the day, I'm not an office person. I'm not a 9 to 5 person, and I'm also not someone that's going to come and sit.
Boots on the ground kind of guy. Yeah.
Yes, I'm very hands-on.
Yes.
So I don't want somebody over my shoulder. I just need to be able to go and do what I need to do.
Nice. Okay.
But you tell me what you want done, I will make sure it happens.
Okay.
That's just the person I am. And if I don't know how to make it happen, I'll find the people to make it happen, and I'll make it happen.
Love it.
So, fast forward, I started investing. I started buying properties. That kind of became my little empire.
Nice.
And then I started diversifying into some businesses. I started consulting for the government, Health Canada, Transport Canada.
So before we jump into some of all of those amazing stuff, I want to touch on some of the lows, because I believe at one point you were really struggling. You were at a really low point where you literally said, your words, you were couch surfing.
Yeah, so just before I started the business, I was in the midst of the separation. And again, I had a really good job. I had a condo, I had a nice car, you know, all that sort of stuff. But again, I went through some tough times. And I lost everything, because when I separated, I gave everything to my ex, because at the end of the day, I knew the route that I was going. And, you know, as much as I wanted my son with me, I always had good communication with her. And I told her, this is the path I want to go. This is what I want to do. So go ahead. But I was too nice. And I got the bad end of the stick.
Fair.
So from that, I ended up with nothing. And I had nothing, and I gave up my condo, and then was ordered to pay all this money in child support, which cleaned out my bank account, which I didn't think it was going to happen like that, because I was being really nice and thinking someone else would be really nice towards me, but the opposite
doesn't work
happened.
like that.
So
how do you go from that guy who had nothing to the man that we see in front of us today?
Friends and perseverance. Honestly, if I did not have the group of friends that I had, and if I didn't have those relationships that I had, I would have been on the streets. And it was between 4 friends. And actually, when I opened the men's shelter, those 4 friends came and took pictures there.
Wow.
And I had to make sure those 4 friends came there, because I always told them, I'm going to do something one day, and I'm going to make sure to repay you guys for this. And they never like when I started becoming successful, even though I was couch surfing and I was a nuisance to them, because I was on their couch, right? So they'd come down in the morning, I'm in the middle of their family time, you know, the husband and wife, they're going to work or whatever, and I'm just there. And unfortunately, I had hit some depression, and I was in a bad rut. And it was actually my one good buddy, also the reason I moved to Shelburne, Dinesh and Rochelle, that came and talked to me one day, and he's like, you need to get up and do something.
Wow.
And I understand the rut you're in, but you got to put your mind to something to keep busy. And that's how I ended up going out and starting a company and doing a lot of the stuff that I was doing. And I found that keeping busy kept my mind off the negative thoughts. And my problem is, and I find this is with everybody, because I work with a lot of homeless youth, I work with a lot of homeless men, and I find that when your mind is idle, nothing good comes of it.
That's so true.
Like when you're sitting there in a bad situation and you're thinking about that bad situation, it can only get worse. So I always try to stay active. When my dad passed away, I started volunteering at the youth shelter up here. I literally went there, but they had heard about me. I was running youth shelters at this point for a good amount of time in the city, and they had found out I was up here, and they asked me to come in. And a lot of people were like, what are you doing? And I'm like, keeping busy.
I love that.
Because I was depressed.
Yeah.
I just lost my dad. My dad was my sounding board. That was the only person I was able to talk to openly and freely, and he would just give it to me straight.
And I think this explains who you are as a man, as a person, as a father, as a husband. And on that note, we're going to take a short break and dive more into The Superhero Does Not Wear a Cape with Randy Narine.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with In Conversation with Alethia.
Listen, you have a passion for something, so my passion was cooking, and Rogers allowed me to share my passion with everybody. And it is work, it is commitment, but it doesn't feel like it, right? When you're up there, you're doing it, you're presenting it. Love every minute of it. Absolutely. And I thank Rogers for allowing me to share my passion with the community. Yeah.
Welcome back to In Conversation with Alethia. I'm in the studio with Randy Narine. The title of this episode is The Superhero Does Not Wear a Cape. And we left off the conversation just talking about dad and the impact that dad had on your life. So let's pick up that conversation. And I know part of that stems from, mental health and tying that into why you give back to the community and you starting your homeless shelter. So pick that up for me.
On the homeless shelter side?
Yes.
So I didn't start the homeless shelter. I had just joined the board there because they were looking for help and guidance on trying to restructure and take the shelter into a new direction and another level, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So I went in there and I fell in love with the place because my heart is with youth, because I know what it's like to be a struggling youth.
Wow.
And again, I grew up poor. I know what real poor looks like.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people in Canada think they know what poor is like. I used to bathe in a bucket.
Wow.
with a margarine bowl. Yeah. And if I wanted hot water, I used to have to boil half the water and then pour it back in the bucket, and then I'd have warm water. Or if I really wanted to be brave, I'd have the boiling pot of water in the bathtub or in the showers with me, and I'd be picking up and dashing it on my skin. And I was the most efficient showerer because I only had one bucket.
Yeah.
So you'd have to lather your skin and rinse it off with one bucket. So I know what it was like, and I've always had a soft spot for kids, especially me growing up and then having a child.
Yes.
And then seeing, actually it was some of the kids at my son's school, and realizing these breakfast programs are as big as they are. And a lot of people knock the breakfast programs in school, and that's actually where I really started, was helping out through breakfast programs through Rotary. So I was a Rotarian trying to give back, and I discovered these breakfast programs, and then from there I discovered there was one at my son's school, and then I discovered how many kids were going to it. And I didn't realize how many kids were going to it. And the other part to it is it's a lot of BIPOC kids that were going to it. And the
so that
parents,
hits home.
Yeah, so like kids are struggling, families are struggling. It's, imagine as a kid going to school hungry.
You can't learn. You can't
I
learn
never
in that
went to school
environment.
hungry, but my parents hustled.
Yes.
And sometimes I didn't have the greatest food, but I had food.
Yes.
And that's one thing I could always attest to, is that wasn't something I never had to struggle with. So seeing this and being in a position to do something about it, that's where it is. And like, I'm a big Nelson Mandela fan, and I listen to his books, and he always says, if you have the ability to help someone and you choose not to,
Right.
you're the bad person at that point.
That's a powerful statement.
Because again, like everybody has the ability to do something, and it doesn't mean you have to do a lot, but the ripple effect of helping one person is tremendous. I'm going to go back to one quick thing. When I first came to Canada, we had no money, so my dad used to collect Canadian Tire money.
Yes.
So what happened was I saved up all this Canadian Tire money, realizing it's real money and I could buy something in the store. So 10-year-old me goes to Canadian Tire with all this money on Christmas to buy these two things for my parents. Mitt warmers for my dad, because I'd see how bad it was cold outside, and my mom liked to bake. So a little bake tray. Honestly, it was probably like $1 for these two items, right? So I went there, I had it. I'm 10-year-old, sitting at the counter. I put the money down. I'm so proud. I'm like, I am going to surprise my parents.
Amazing.
And the guy said $1.05 or whatever it was. I don't remember the amount. I'm even making up the dollar number, but I'm like, what are you talking about? I calculated this, and I'm really good at math. Like, young me was even better at math. So I'm like, nope, here's the numbers. He goes, you forgot about taxes.
Oh, man.
And instantly, I was in tears. I'm like, I don't know where I'm going to get this money from. And I had to pick between which parent I wanted, and Christmas was like 2 days away. I don't know where I was going to get 5 cents from, or whatever the amount was. So this older lady was standing behind me, and she's like, son, what's wrong? And I said, oh, I saved up this. And the minuscule amount, she gave it to him. And that has been something I talk about a lot, because that is the butterfly effect, the ripple effect of one act of kindness that is always stuck in my head. I've told my kids that when I do motivational speaking. I tell everybody that, so they can understand that you may not think it's anything,
but to someone else,
but to somebody else, that's the world. Do you know, I went home, to this day, my parents still have those items.
Wow.
My parents never got rid of it. And that has been motivation for me. So helping out these kids, and a lot of the charity work I do is because I know what it's like to be on the other end. And to me, it's nothing. It really is nothing. But to them, it's a lot.
Yes, yes.
And as small as these items are that they need, and to be able to have this shelter, and to be able to pool the community and my resources from the business world and all over, just to come together and to do something good, it is the greatest feeling.
Again, leveraging those amazing relationships you've built.
And I don't do this for anything. I don't advertise a lot of this stuff. I don't advertise half the things.
Yes, clearly, because I had to go and do some research to find out about this.
But, you know, at the end of the day, it's just what brings me joy, and it brings me happiness. And I'm a big believer in karma, and I always want to make sure that I'm doing good. Because it's not even for me, it's for my family and my kids.
I love that. Because
I'm hoping one day, if they're ever in a situation and they need help, someone else is going to come and help them if I'm not there.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? And it's just, I'm not going to be around forever. And I tell them that all the time. You guys need to be able to figure things out yourself. Not that I don't want to help you, but you got to be independent. You need to be able to do stuff on your own. You can't rely on people.
Powerful.
And this is just how life is.
Right.
I don't want to smother them, because I'd be failing as a parent to myself. I'd be failing as a parent if I smother them so much, and then they can't go out in society and be independent on their own.
True.
Then I'll be that parent with that kid still living at home at the age of 40. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's kind of how all that came about.
I want to transition a little bit to your role as a firefighter. And being a firefighter, you know, a visible minority individual, doing firefighting, it's not easy. And I'm sure, obviously, you talked about the fact that you came here as a refugee, so you didn't have an uncle or a dad or a grandfather that was in the trade. So how did you get started in firefighting, and what has that experience been like?
Becoming a firefighter was an accident.
Okay.
So I sold off my company. I'm doing very well for myself. I ended up in Shelburne because of a friend, and I seen the houses, and I just got sick of the city, to be honest. Like, I lived downtown, Brampton, Mississauga. I just got tired of it. So I ended up moving up here. I was married at the time, and we had split up shortly after moving here. But it was because we moved here, we ended up splitting up. So I walked around the town looking for places to volunteer. And that's all I was trying to do, because I couldn't keep up with the volunteer commitments in the city because it's too far. And a lot of days I never actually left the house because I didn't have to work much, right? So I did my little businesses and stuff, but I did it all from home.
So you started off as a volunteer firefighter?
I started off. That's how I ended up getting on. I went and applied. I was the first ethnic firefighter hired with Shelburne District Fire Department.
Amazing.
And the honest truth is, it presented a lot of challenges. Being the first colored firefighter there, and you know, Shelburne is not the most diverse place in the world, and they're not the most, at the time, welcoming of people of color. So it was very challenging, because half the guys there didn't want me and the other half were fine with me.
But you've been able to evolve and grow from there, and you know, despite the challenges, you know, lots of learning opportunities and experience, and now you're thriving as a firefighter in the city of Brampton. But above and beyond that, I want to touch on some of the work that you're doing, especially giving back. You've done a number of training sessions with the refugees here, but you've also done some work back home in Trinidad on firefighting, you know, safety. And can you talk about a little bit about that experience?
So with this background in firefighting, so to succeed in firefighting, I decided to start educating myself. And I'm a big believer in education is powerful. So what I started doing was I went back and I did a lot of courses. I did, I think, 8 in 1 year. And it was just for me to have a real grasp on everything, because again, I'm getting into something new that I don't have a lot of, you know, intel on, and I just want to be good at it, because at the end of the day, all I can think about, if someone's calling 911, I'm coming.
Yes.
and I'm the last line of defense. And I really need to make sure, because what if I go to my family's house? What if I go to one of my friend's house and I'm standing there with my hands in my pockets because I don't know what to do? So I really had to push myself. Then I realized there was a major gap, because the fire service is the least diverse thing in the world. In the province of Ontario, there's about 30,000 firefighters, maybe 500 are BIPOC.
Wow.
About 2,000 are women. So
Wow.
everybody else is Caucasian male. The education being done towards to newcomers to Canada or anybody that's BIPOC was not working, because nobody knows how to talk to them. Everyone that did talked to them as if it was a chore,
Right.
and the message wasn't being conveyed. So I started my own program 7 years ago called Ethnic Fire Talks. So what I do, though, is I go to the churches, gurdwaras, mandirs. I go anywhere where there's a newcomer to Canada, and it doesn't have to be a BIPOC, but it could be someone coming from Greece or Italy. If you're not from here and you're new to the country and you need help with fire education, I go in and I do these talks, bridging that gap. And I use my experience as a newcomer to Canada to help them understand why they need to do these things.
Right. And that's what I love about the program too, because you're talking about preventative measures,
Yes.
right? Not just that the fire is here, you need to call 911, but these are the things that you need to do if there's a grease fire.
Yes. What I try to do is I try to explain to people why, because I'm that person. If you don't explain why to me, I'll never grasp it. But if you explain to me why, I'll never forget it. So that's how I teach. When I teach anybody, I go a little overboard with the why, because I feel if people understand why and how it'll affect them and impact them, they'll understand it more. And especially immigrants or newcomers to Canada, when you explain to them why they need to do that to keep their family safe, they understand it better. Because at the end of the day, the only reason they came here is for their families and for a better life. So that's the string you need to tug on to get them to do what they need to do to keep them safe.
When you understand the why, then everything else will unravel and unfold. I love that.
So from that, I started seeing a lot of other things happening in the community with people of color, and I go there to help because I understand that there's a lot of people in the service that do want to help them, but just don't know how.
I love that.
And they don't understand how. So I always tell them, I'm here to bridge that gap. And sometimes it's just the wording of the way you're saying it that they're not understanding it because you're coming off too harsh on the get-go.
Right.
It's different if I'm harsh on the get-go because I'm harsh through that cultural
lens.
So they understand what I'm trying to say to them.
I love it. I love it.
And that's so key, and I don't think a lot of people understand that. When I saw those refugees coming here and sleeping on the streets, I was livid. But
that's why you also took the time to give back and you're now helping them. And Randy, I want to take this opportunity to thank you because we can have another full-on hour conversation on this topic. So thank you for taking the time to have the conversation with me on In Conversation with Alethia. And honestly, thank you for all of the work that you're doing in the community. We didn't get to dive into your rich history, but it's clearly evident, the amount of work that you're doing and the impact and your why. The great work that you're doing, stems from a place of heart and you yourself having been impacted coming here as a refugee. So thank you for contributing to Canada, and thank you for being on In Conversation with Alethia.
Thanks for having me.
Stay tuned for another amazing episode of In Conversation with Alethia. Until next time, thank you.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.